I'm a bit self-aware, sometimes it's fucked up, but life is gonna lie, so I ain't gonna slow up. I'm on a mission to change the face of mental health, kicking knowledge to my people, cause you know that health is wealth. It's your lucky day, cause you tuned into the greatest. Out here striving to survive, sometimes we fake it till we make it. If your mental health is slipping, then please don't touch that dial, go and grab a cookie. Yo, what's up, you guys? It's your girl, Trudy LPC, and thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Self-Aware and Effed Up podcast. You guys are really in for a treat today because I have an amazing guest with me. Her name is Chrysta Bairre, and she does a lot of amazing shit, and I can't wait to talk to her and learn more about what she does. She is a keynote speaker. She's also the author of Beautiful Badass, and I mean, come on, with a title like that, you already know what you're in for. She has an upcoming book called Asking for Help, and she's also the owner of Live, Love, Work, and She Goes High. So we are going to get into all that Chrysta does and all of the great things that she does with spreading love out into the world. So without further ado, please welcome to the Self-Aware and Effed Up podcast, Chrysta Bairre. Hey, Chrysta, how's it going?
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's truly awesome to be here with you today.
I'm grateful that we were able to get together today. I'm really intrigued by your story and wanted to just learn more about what you do. I know you've navigated a lot of personal challenges and they've, likely led you on your path. So we can actually just dive on in and have you tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much. I absolutely have had a unique and challenging story. Like so many of us, I think, that's the thing is you never really know what someone's story is until you have a conversation with them. And that's true for me too. I grew up in poverty and had some invisible disabilities as a kid that were undiagnosed. I grew up in a home that was very unstable. We moved around a lot. I went to 6 different elementary schools. So when I say we moved around a lot, I mean like a lot.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot.
We were just like, there was no consistency. There was such a lack of safety and security, and having these different conditions, which are largely invisible. I mean, they're medical conditions that people can't see, but they affect my internal experience and they affect how I move through the world and how I navigate the world. And so I had a lot of challenges growing up because of these disabilities that I had that were undiagnosed and mostly unseen. I mean, people could tell that I struggled with things. Teachers could tell, other adults could tell, but there was a lot of assumptions about why I was struggling and why I was having a difficult time. I got called obstinate a lot. I was told I was being belligerent a lot, things like that. Like no one was actually seeing what was really going on with me and why I was struggling. It was assumed that it was just an attitude problem or a behavioral problem or something like that. So I really had to be an advocate for myself from a very young age, because that was the only way I was going to get through, because no one in my life, especially with my family moving around so much and my home life being so unstable, like no one was really looking out for me and the challenges that I was having. No one was saying, hey, let's help you get access to some resources, or what would make this easier for you. I was on my own and so much of the time. And, my siblings and I, all of us, we're really on our own navigating things it's like so much of the time just trying to have to figure out for ourselves how to do what we needed to do to, get food, to get ourselves to school, to get home, all of that kind of thing. It was like, we really, all of us had to be advocates for ourselves. Self-awareness was huge. Out of my siblings that I grew up with, I'm the only one that graduated from high school. To this day, I'm the only one that even has a driver's license and, things like that, because from such a young age, I recognized that things were different for me than they were for other people, and that I needed to find a way to make things work for me, and that I needed to find resources for myself and get connected and get help. And that involved like such a level of the self-awareness.
Yeah.
To be able to do that, Yeah. So I did that, got through high school, graduated high school, in in my 20s and 30s, I came out as queer. So that was like a whole journey in and of itself.
Okay.
And, started building up a career for myself. Later on, started a business. Later in life, I went through perimenopause, which was, very challenging for me. And that was when, going through perimenopause was really what instigated me getting diagnosed with a lot of the conditions that I lived with, those invisible disabilities, because a lot of them became significantly worse during perimenopause. The physiological changes that were happening brought up a lot of stuff. And I could no longer manage on my own. I could, my own hacks, my own ways to create accessibility for myself were no longer enough. And that led to me actually getting diagnosed, late diagnosed autistic for one.
Okay.
I have other co-occurring conditions that are very common with autism, like POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. It's a mouthful, which is gaining a lot more awareness in recent years. Because a lot more people are being diagnosed with POTS now than we've ever had before, in addition to some other conditions that I live with. And so I feel like so much of my life has over and over and over again been this process and this experience of like, hey, the world as it sits right now was not designed for you or someone like you. And if you want to have any level of happiness, joy, success, personal fulfillment, like you're going to have to figure it out on your own and advocate for yourself, have this really increased level of self-awareness that you have to work with and move out into the world. So, that's a little bit of backstory on me. I know that's a lot.
Yeah. You threw it all out there and I'm grateful for that. The therapist in me is like, okay, that's a lot to dissect. Because I think the fact that you at such a young age, you were able to recognize these differences. Your siblings were able to recognize some things are going on, but the people in your life were not in a space to support you and help you, but you had to find those resources independently. And I think that just kind of speaks to your strength. And then really, being able to navigate that. You're saying you're the only one in your family in terms of your siblings that was able to graduate and was able to make it through that process. And I know that, in today's society, we're talking a lot more about autism spectrum disorders and neurodivergence, but back then that was not something that we talked about. If you didn't stand out as like, okay, clearly that's occurring and then some type of intellectual disability is also occurring, it really went undiagnosed. So were you kind of internally in your lived experience, did you kind of recognize that might be the case before you got the formal diagnosis?
I always knew I was different. I always knew I didn't belong. I got bullied a lot in school. I really struggled socially in school and to have friends because I was so different. So, people around me were really quick to point out regularly and often that I was different. So I always knew that was true. I always knew, I just didn't understand exactly how I was different or, what that was about me that was different. I just knew that. So in some level, like I was very aware of those differences. And I was also very aware that the things that I had to do for myself to manage in situations other people didn't have to do. I was very aware that other people didn't have those same challenges. So from that perspective, I did suspect there was something different about me. Definitely not autism. That was not even something I would have considered because like a lot of people, I think my perception of autism was a very narrow representation of what autism can look like, particularly how it tends to in middle-class white boys, which is a demographic that certainly I think it's more acceptable for them to behave outside of social norms and to operate outside of social norms. People don't like it, but they can get away with it. But I think when you start layering in intersectional identities, what starts to happen is that you can't show up with these social differences, you become mistrusted, you become unsafe in a lot of environments when you have one or more marginalized identity and you're showing up and you have difficulty with interacting with other people and social communication and picking up on social cues. You are no longer safe in the world.
Yeah.
And, so my view of what autism looked like was what I had seen represented largely in the media, which was a very narrow view of what it can look like.
Right.
I didn't know it's, autism spectrum disorder, like it's on a spectrum. It doesn't look the same or show up the same in all people. And when I started to learn about autism spectrum disorder, and I really started to learn about it because I was diagnosed with sensory processing disorder first. That was like the first diagnosis I got. And a lot of the research and a lot of the books and information about sensory processing disorder overlap with talking about autism because there is such a significant co-occurrence of those conditions. And so that was really like, then as I was learning more about autism and the full spectrum of how it can represent, I was like, wait, that applies to me. That applies to me. That applies to me. And I started to think, hey, maybe this is something that I've been dealing with. And when I got my diagnosis, I really remember feeling like this makes so many of my life experiences make sense in context where they just didn't make sense before. Yeah. Like I could never explain or understand why I had some of the experiences that I had or why people treated me the way they did or behaved towards me the way they did. Like it was something I could never really understand why. And then once I learned about autism and I learned that I had it, I was diagnosed with it. I was like, oh, this makes so much more sense as to why I had some of those experiences.
Yeah. I hear that a lot with a lot of people that are diagnosed with autism later in life. It's like, sometimes as clinicians, we may ask like, how will learning about this diagnosis change your life? Like, how will that actually impact you? You've made it 40 plus years without a diagnosis, but for people who are experiencing that, I'm finding that a lot of people have your similar story of it made the world and my life experiences make more sense now that I know that. And it gives me, not even necessarily, I guess, to be put in a box, but like a sense of like belonging. Like this is now, I understand this is my community of people, that understand what it's like to kind of deal with some of those challenges. But another thing you said that also kind of stuck out to me is that you also navigated through your queerness and kind of that part of your discovery. I recently learned that a lot of people that are neurodivergent or on the spectrum, so to speak, that a lot of them have gender dysphoria or some things of that nature, but your side is a little bit different. Can you tell a little bit about just your journey of exploring or identifying and accepting your queerness?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I gave a talk at a Pride event a couple of years ago and talked about how my journey of coming out as a queer person feels very similar to my journey of realizing I was autistic. It just was kind of like, I experienced this thing differently. I look at this, situation differently. I feel differently about this. And, kind of going through that process of being like, am I? No, I'm not. But could I be? But no, I don't, but maybe I think I am. No, I definitely think I am. Oh my gosh, am I though? Like, am I just a big fraud if I like start living my life this way? No, I'm not. I know this is true for me. And so that was kind of like, my process of coming out was very much, when I grew up in the 70s and 80s and very early 90s, like I don't remember knowing directly any queer people. Like I knew queer people existed, but I didn't know any. I didn't have any examples or any people around me that were queer that I could say, oh, okay, this is what it can look like in practice. And it wasn't until the early 90s that queerness started to be represented more publicly. Like when Ellen came out and she was on the cover, I think it was Time magazine, and it was like, yep, I'm gay. And I just remember how groundbreaking that was at the time.
Yeah.
I'm sure younger people who look at that now, they're like, what's the big deal? But like back then, that was a huge, huge
Yeah,
deal.
it was.
And it was just like, wait, what? And, I think in my 20s, I had a friend that was gay. And that was like the first real person that I knew in my life that was gay. And I think through my friendship with her, I was really able to start to give myself permission to accept who I am and to be who I am more fully as it relates to my queerness, and be like, oh, okay, like this is what it looks like to be a queer person in the world. Like this is like, oh, it's okay to do that. Like, oh, I'm allowed to do that. Because I didn't really know that that was an option to be gay before that, because I didn't see it anywhere, and because it wasn't something that was talked about for so much of my life. So, really coming out as a queer person was a longer journey. I mean, I definitely can remember being attracted to women in my teen years. And even at one point, like having somebody ask me if I was a lesbian.
Okay.
And when I was a teenager, and being like, what? No, that's weird. But again, I think it was just that I didn't realize that was even an option, that I could live my life that way, that I could be open about that part of myself. So yeah, and I really recognized it and came out officially in my 20s. And it's been an ongoing journey too, I think, for me, to navigate and come to terms with different aspects of my queerness and how that shows up, and getting comfortable with it. Has definitely been a lifelong journey for me. And you said something significant, because I did some research on this for the talk I gave at Pride a couple of years ago. And there is actually a significant overlap between neurodivergence and queerness. And so neurodivergent people, I think it's like, are between 6 and 7 times more likely to be queer than someone who is not neurodivergent. So a neurotypical person. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So much higher rates of neurodivergence within the queer community.
Yeah, absolutely. Our community is very unique in that. I've actually recently attended a counseling conference, and I took a lot of the CEs for working and learning more about people with autism spectrum disorder and how to be an advocate for them. And I know a lot of what you do is around like community, building community, like creating that space so that people feel connected. And so I'm curious to know what led you down that part of your path in terms of advocacy and just what you do within your career.
I feel like for me, I never really felt like I belonged anywhere. I didn't feel like I really belonged in my own family, in any groups at school. In high school, I can remember I was on the edges of several different types of groups within the school. I took AP classes and I was very skilled academically. So there was kind of like the smart kids, but I didn't really fit in with them. I didn't really belong, but I was like on the periphery of that group. I was on the periphery of the like art students and the creative, kids, but again, didn't quite belong, didn't quite fit in. I was also a theater kid, a theater nerd. That was
I knew you were going to say that. I was like, as you were talking about artistic stuff, I was like, I bet you she is a theater girly. I am too, by the way. So
yeah. That was the group I fit in the most with, for sure, was like the other theater kids. Cause that's kind of, we're the most like eclectic,
yes.
And like anyone can be part of that group, no matter what your background is, I feel like. So that was the group I felt that I belonged to the most. But I still didn't feel like there was a place where I really fit in. And so I think as an adult, as I found my own way and started to find more communities that I did feel like I belonged in, and create space for myself, like by creating communities like the She Goes High community that I started here 9 years ago. This was this idea that I had to start a community where we were all leaders. We were all professionals.
Mm-hmm.
We were all, many of us business owners. But I didn't want to do traditional networking. I wanted to do something where I was like, hey, I want to support the human behind the business, not the human as a business. Because so much traditional networking, especially business networking, is really like your value and your worth is based on what your job is and how well you're doing or what your salary is or what your title is. And we lead with what we do. Like that's the most significant thing about us.
Mm.
In a lot of those spaces. And I was like, hey, I'm a human. I'm like, am I a speaker and an author? Yes, I'm a speaker and an author, but I'm a human first. Like, and whatever's happening with me as a human is impacting how I show up and what I do as a speaker and author and in any, aspect of business. And so I created She Goes High, and I started that community because it was something that I wanted. Like I'd been longing for so much of my life was a space where I felt like I belonged, where I got to be met as a human, where I got to interact with people in different ways than the ways that I had experienced, up till now. And so I think so much of what I do, even when I'm speaking, like I love to speak at employee resource groups, for example. That's one of my favorite places to speak because, you've got these people within these larger companies that, they're trying to find community. They're trying to connect. And I love to empower others and help other people feel validated and seen and feel like they belong, because that was something I didn't get. And so I can now create space and permission and agency for other people to have community, to have belonging that I didn't have. I can make the world better, even if it's just a little bit, for people by creating that space. And that's what I want to do because I would have benefited from that. When I was younger, I desired that. Like I wanted that so deeply for myself, and I just didn't know how to find it. I didn't find it. And so I created it, and now I get to create it for other people.
I love that about your journey. I think that, sometimes we are sent here, if we want to get on the whole universe level, where sometimes we're sent here to create those spaces that don't exist for people like us. And I think that community is so important. But I think a lot of times we're taught to be self-sufficient. We're taught to just do it on our own and make things happen. And I love that you created this space that, speaks to the healing and inner child that you needed, this space for, but also you are, taking control of the narrative and really, building out this beautiful thing. And I love how you're doing. I love kind of what, you do. And I'm curious to know more about the other aspects of what you do. Cause I told you before we started the show, I like to live. I love the love, but the work piece, I need to know more about that.
Yeah. And, when I started my business, Live, Love, Work, I started it 11 years ago, and I was doing career coaching. And then I started speaking and writing. I've been doing for most of my life. And I had, been a blogger for 10 years and, all of that. And so I was doing career coaching, and that's where the work part comes from, because I was working with people to help them have the empowerment and the boundaries and the strategies to be more fulfilled at work and to be better paid at work. And so that's primarily the work that I was focused on when I started my business. And I did that for many years. And really, once I got to working with people, or I was having conversations with people, I would say a lot of what I do is really about self-worth, how we view our own worth, because we communicate how we view our own worth to people that we interact with all the time. And it's not just about other people valuing us. If we're not communicating the value that we see in ourselves, then it's really difficult for other people to value us at the level that we're really showing up at. So many I see so many humans just contributing in such amazing ways and such significant ways and not giving themselves credit for it, not recognizing the full impact that they're truly having. So a big piece of that was the work that I was doing as a career coach, was helping people recognize and acknowledge the contributions they were already making, and then also creating boundaries around work, so that they weren't overgiving and overgiving and overgiving. Upside down, where like they give so much and receive so little in the workplace. And that was where I started from, in my business. And of course, my business has evolved over the 11 years. And now I'm not doing coaching anymore. And I'm just focused on the speaking and the writing. I wrote my first book, Beautiful Badass: How to Believe in Yourself Against the Odds, which again, I wasn't even diagnosed as autistic or any of my other diagnoses when I wrote that book. But the whole part about against the odds was because it was so much, right? Like the traditional paths to success weren't really available to me. I had to kind of find my own way. I had to carve my own path. So it was very much about that. And the book that I'm finalizing right now, called Radiant Receiving: How to Ask for Help, it is like the next level, because I absolutely grew up very hyper independent. I was parentified as a child, and I was on my own so much of the time. I already spoke to that. And so I was very, very hyper independent. And that worked for me to a point.
Yeah.
To a point. And then it didn't work after that point. And also I was very isolated and very lonely. And so this whole idea of creating community and of being willing and open to receiving support as much as I was willing to give was like the next level of my journey, was to recognize, where I'm limited. Like there's this trope out there that just drives me bananas, which is the unstoppable trope. And I feel like it's put on women more so. And it's just like, to be unstoppable, to do it all, to, be the strong, independent woman.
Yeah.
Which is like, great. I am a strong, independent woman. But you know what? I am not unstoppable. I am, in fact, very stoppable. I am so stoppable. There is definitely a point that I am stoppable. And, and I think about this too. And as I've been talking more about the topic of asking for help, as I've been speaking on that topic more, writing this book for the last couple of years, I like to say to people, even superheroes are stoppable. Even superheroes have that thing. Superman has kryptonite, right? And even superheroes need help. And then they get help in the form of team ups, or, Batman has Alfred the Butler, right? Like no one, even a superhero, isn't really out there doing it alone. And so why do we have that expectation for us mere mortals, mere human beings, that we should be able to do all of these things independently and on our own and be there for others? And, maybe we occasionally allow someone to be there for us, but we have all, shame and guilt around that when it happens. And a lot of the time we're just trying to do it all, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, make things work for ourselves. If we're going through something difficult, it's like, well, let me get myself together before I share this with someone else. And it was during 2020, during the pandemic, that I really started to think about this, and was thinking about, because right before the pandemic hit, a friend of mine had heart surgery, and a bunch of people from the She Goes High community, we were coming around, we were setting up like, a meal train, seeing how we could help her, how we could support her. And COVID came not too long after that. My friend went through her heart surgery. And I started to think about, why do we as a society wait until a life or death situation to start showing up for each other? What if we started showing up for each other? And what if we as individuals were open to have people show up for us before it's a crisis, before it's a life or death situation? What if showing up for each other and being in connection and community with each other was just a normalized part of our day and something that we just did regularly so that fewer people even got to that point of crisis and got to that point of desperation.
Yeah. I think we would definitely be in a better space overall. But I think that we're taught from a very young age that we should be self-sufficient. We're raised to be completely self-sufficient. Like it starts from childhood. You get the baby and they have the bottle, and okay, now we want the baby to hold their own bottle after a couple of months. We are constantly, from the time we come into this earth, we're taught that we should be independent. We should not have to rely on other people, and I think that I know men are taught that, but it's also something that is ingrained in women. You don't want to have to depend on a man for anything. You don't want to have to depend on other people. People will fail you. All of those things, I think they're embedded in our core belief systems because that we hear it from the time we're born until we're old enough to kind of make those decisions on our own in terms of how we ask for help. And again, you said it, it's the stigma, it's the shame. Like, why? I don't want people to know that I need this. But, I think most of our systems prior to us becoming so, engulfed, especially in the American kind of settings, like before we became this, it did used to be about community. It did used to be about that before life changed and became so complicated with everything that we have going on. So I'm curious from your perspective, how do we get from this place of it's all on me, I don't need anybody's help, to, I guess, rewiring our brains in a certain way to realize that we are social creatures. We're meant to be a part of a community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's such a great question. And it's so, like, I think the answer is there's not one path to get there. I think there's so many different paths we can take to get there. And that's part of the reason I wrote this book about asking for help, because it explores a lot of those different paths and a lot of the underlying reasons that we don't always ask for help or that we're not comfortable needing help and all of those pieces. And so I think it looks like a lot of things, but I really think it starts with just recognizing our humanness and embracing our humanness. I think that's like a first step. And to recognize that it's not a failure. We're not failures to not be able to do it all ourselves. We're not really meant to, and it's impossible to. It's actually impossible to do it all ourselves and be 100% independent. At some point in time, we will need help, but even beyond the help that we need, something really beautiful happens when we show up for each other, when we have community. And that is a deeper level of enrichment and nurturing and relationship building that is so much more rewarding, in my opinion, when we are really connected with each other and when we're open to being vulnerable enough with each other to be there for each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's hard sometimes for us to accept that. Like, as you were talking, I'm thinking about me during the time that I lost my dad, and people were kind of wanting to show up, wanting to support, asking me, what do you need? In me, I am a helper. I am the person that does the helping. I am not the person that receives help. And so that was hard, not from a place of ego or pride, but I'm just not used to people helping me. I'm used to people, taking, and maybe they need help, but not me as a person. Do you feel like that's something you've ever struggled with, like being in a position where you were open to receiving help?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's been a huge struggle for me. Because I was so hyper independent and parentified growing up, and I was so used to doing things for myself and for others. I mean, one of the hacks that I had for myself as, an undiagnosed autistic kid that, seemed odd and strange and people didn't always like me, as I started helping, I became a helper because I found that I was either tolerated or sometimes welcomed in spaces that I otherwise would not have been tolerated or welcomed in if I was showing up to serve. If I was showing up in service, that was a doorway for me to be more connected to other humans. And so that became such a core part of my identity that was like, I'm I'm the helper. I help.
Yeah.
And I have my first book, Beautiful Badass. I have a bunch of illustrations in it. And there's this one illustration that I just love, which is this, I call her Proud Woman, the character Proud Woman, with like 6 arms, and like each arm is like doing a different thing because she's helping all these other people with stuff, right? And she's like, I'm the helper. I can help with all of the things. And that became such a core part of my identity. And it became such a core part of my safety and security as a human being, was like, if through helping, I was allowed into spaces that otherwise I might not have been allowed into. And so it felt very scary to think about not having that be such an important part of my identity, and instead being someone who received the help and who received support. So it was definitely a challenge for me. And it was something that I've been working on for a couple of years before the pandemic, but particularly during the pandemic, it really started to hit home for me because I was so isolated. I lived by myself, and I was in the late stage of perimenopause. And, you know, I was like, all of the medical conditions that I lived with were becoming more and more unmanageable for me. And I was struggling so much. And I really had to learn to receive. Like, that was such a significant time in my journey of learning how to receive, was the pandemic happening. And a very good friend of mine, Amanda, she called me up one day and she said, I have something I want to offer you, but I think that it's going to be hard for you to receive. Are you open to hearing me out? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Okay. You know, and I might not have been open to it if she hadn't prefaced it that way, but she did. And she said, I want to set up a meal train for you so that you can feel more supported, because I know you've been struggling. And I really wanted to say no. Like, I wanted to say no and say, like, I'm capable of making my own meals, right? Like, I'm capable of doing these things for myself. And I had such shame around the idea of somebody helping me with something that I was capable of doing myself. Like, why should somebody do that for me? And, you know, it was really through particularly my relationship with my dear friend Amanda, that I started to have my eyes opened to learning that, first of all, what if things don't have to be hard? Just because I'm capable of doing something myself doesn't mean I always have to be the one to do it. And getting help from others just makes things easier. And like, don't I deserve some ease in my life? Like, isn't that okay for me to have things be just a little bit easier? Why do I have to insist on things being as hard as fucking possible because I'm going to do it myself?
You're right.
And I'm going to help other people, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, it was really that, like, it was very difficult for me, but I allowed her to set up that meal train. And it included more than meals. It included also things, because it was the pandemic, it included things like people sending me cards in the mail just to let me know they were thinking of me. It included things like people could sign up to meet me at a park and go for a walk, like a socially distanced walk. And just, you know, to be in a position to receive.
Yeah.
And it was so vulnerable, you know, and again, I there were so many times in the process I wanted to be like, no, but I'm okay, you know, put on that tough front that I was so used to putting on, instead of just acknowledging and recognizing how much I was truly struggling with my mental health at that time, and just allowing myself to be cared for by others.
Yeah. Which is hard. Yeah. So it sounds like you definitely can relate to what my experience of that looks like. And as you were speaking, I kind of was looking and examining myself. And that's why I love doing this podcast, because, you know, when I speak with people, it really kind of puts a mirror up to me and my experience of this. Because, you know, the podcast is all about helping people relate and understand it. You're not the only one going through this thing. But I had to ask myself, like, did I become a helper because of wanting to be in certain spaces, or wanting to look a certain way, or be in, you know, looked at? So now I have to, you know, process that with my therapist next week. And it's all good, because that's what this is all about. But I really, appreciate your openness and sharing with me today. And I want to shift gears a bit, and I want to ask you, because this is your first time on the Self-Aware and Effed Up podcast, how do you personally connect with the idea of being self-aware and fucked up?
Personally, I connect with the idea of being self-aware and, fucked up because, geez, the whole world is kind of fucked up, especially now. And so it's like, I'm just living in the present. And I think self-awareness is very much in the present as well. As an autistic person, one of the things that I've experienced is alexithymia, which you probably know, but for anyone who doesn't know, it's the inability to identify emotions. And that is something that I really had to learn how to do. I had to practice. I had to learn that skill. And I also struggle with interoception, which is our sensory system that tells us, it helps us identify our internal bodily cues, like I'm hungry, I'm tired, I need to go to the bathroom, all of those things. That's data that we get from our interoceptive sensory system. And that is one of my sensory systems that does not function very well. So I don't always have an awareness of myself. In fact, I was a bedwetter until I was, I think, around 8 or 9. And that was one of the many things that I really got bullied and made fun of for. But now I can look back and I can see there was a reason that happened. That happened because I had difficulty with my interoception. Like I didn't always know when I needed to go to the bathroom. And so for me to even survive, not even thrive, but for me to even survive, like I had to become more self-aware. I had to learn how to identify my emotions. I had to learn how to get deeply connected with myself and be able to identify, what my body's needs were and what my human needs were and who I was as a person. And because, in the childhood I grew up in, because no one was really looking out for me and I had to look out for myself, like that involved such a high level of like, knowing myself, knowing what I needed, knowing how to accommodate myself in all the ways that I could accommodate myself, knowing what help to ask for and when I did ask for help, which was, not as common when I was younger. But there certainly were times that I did see an opportunity and asked for it. And it's really the only way I survived. Like that being self-aware was how I survived and how I got to this point that I'm at today. And so that's such a huge piece of it. And then as I've matured and have learned so much more, I feel like now my relationship with self-awareness is really about presence and being present to myself, being present in my body, being present to this current moment and honoring myself, in situations, at least considering myself, because I used to not consider myself that much when there was another person around. I only considered myself when I was alone. And when there were other people around, I was attuned to other people and other people's needs and other people's moods and other people's perspectives and attitudes and behaviors. And it's like I would disappear. Yeah. And so to me, self-awareness now looks like being aware of myself, even with other people around, and being attuned to myself at least as much as I'm attuned to the people around me.
Yeah, gotcha. I love that. And thank you for going there and sharing that with me. I really, really appreciate you in your openness today. I kind of went in really just hoping to learn, and I definitely learned a lot from you and about you. So before we wrap up, I want you to share with the audience, how can they connect with you if they want to purchase your book your speaking services, or connect with your communities?
Absolutely. Yeah. The best place to go is to my website, which is liveandlovework.com. And so you can find on liveandlovework.com, you can find my contact page. You can find a link to She Goes High, the empowerment community that I founded. You can find a link to purchase my book. You can get Beautiful Badass. That's the current book that's out. Beautiful Badass at any major online retailer. You can go and request it at your library and see if they'll order it in. You can go to an independent bookstore and special order it if they don't already stock it. And then my upcoming book, Radiant Receiving, How to Ask for Help, will be coming out early next year. So if you go to my website and get connected with me there, you can stay updated on what I have coming up.
Awesome. Well, Chrysta, thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciated being able to learn about you. Guys, please make sure that you connect with Chrysta. The information for how you can connect with her will be in the description of this episode. Also, be sure to follow me, Tree the LPC, on all social media platforms under the handle Tree the LPC. Until next time, be safe, be well, and take care of your motherfucking mental health.
I'm a bit self-aware. Sometimes it's fucked up, but life is gonna lie. So I ain't gonna slow up. I'm on a mission to change the face of mental health. Kicking knowledge to my people, cause you know that health is wealth. It's your lucky